Hi there, warm welcome. You're watching Blueprint Explosive Exclusive and I'm Meghna Deka. Well, today on the show, we are going to discuss, has there been another Wuhan-like disaster in China? Did a Chinese nuclear submarine sink? What is the Chinese PLA trying to hide? And is an ecological threat looming large across the world? Well, why do we ask you this? It's because an American official has made a sensational claim about China. Well, the world's largest navy's newest submarine reportedly sank at the Wuchang shipyard between May and June this year. Not just this, China is even facing allegations of an attempt to conceal the sinking. Satellite images, however, have been released from June, reportedly confirm that its efforts to manage the aftermath of the sinking incident. On 10th of March, the boat can be seen on being prepared for a sea trial, while on the 15th of June, a bit later, the submarine is not visible. So the Chinese government, on its part, has been very tight-lipped about this entire incident. The only response which is coming in from Chinese officials is that they have no information, which seems to be consistent with the PLA's practice of downplaying or outrightly even denying such mishaps, especially those which can threaten to question its image of a military competence. As a result, the cause of the incident is now not known. Even on the extent of the damage, there is still no clarity. For the world, this is a cause of huge concern because we don't have a confirmation yet whether it had a nuclear fuel on board at the time of sinking or not. It also raises questions about the potential environment and safety hazards that it may just pose if indeed a nuclear-fueled submarine has sunk. Will China clarify on this big claim by the US? Well, we'll have to wait and see. Well, in fact, let me go across to our panelists. Joining us today on the show, we have Professor Madhav Nalapad, the Vice Chair of Manipal Advanced Research Group. We are also being joined live from China, Beijing to be precise, Einar Tangen. He is a Senior Fellow at the Taipei Institute and also the Chairperson of Asia Narratives. Thank you so much, Mr. Tangen, for joining us here on the show. It's interesting. Despite what the report has now claimed, a US official has also claimed as well, and there are satellite images, China's reaction to this. The Chinese embassy in the US has said specifically, we are not familiar with the situation you mentioned and currently have no information to provide. Interestingly, this is not an acceptance, but it's not even a denial. Why?
Well, if I asked you to prove that you hadn't done something, could you? The fact is that all of this, the timing is very suspect. You had a major embarrassment within the U.S. Navy once again when their tanker that supplies the oil for the nuclear carriers in the Gulf ran aground. And this is extremely embarrassing. I mean, in nautical terms, running into a sandbar is the equivalent of taking your submarine and ramming it into a mountain, which also happened. And there's a pattern in practice. When the U.S. is embarrassed, it tends to dredge up or create some sort of incident like this, claiming that somehow China's worse off than we are and that you should be paying attention to them instead of our own mishaps. So, I mean, this is exactly what happened in the Philippines. As soon as the Pentagon had acknowledged that they had a disinformation campaign against Chinese vaccines in the Philippines. The day after, or within a short, less than 48 hours, all of a sudden Filipino ships were ramming into Chinese Coast Guard ships. So there's a pattern in practice here. It's what they're paid to do. Remember, there's $90 billion which are sent to the State Department, which are, Defense Department, which are not for the military per se, but for disinformation, clandestine activities, and diplomacy.
Einar Tangen, allow me to rephrase my question. If a nuclear submarine were to sink on the shores of China, would China admit to it, especially if it were to be one of its newest nuke-able submarines? Would China ever admit it?
Well, that's speculation. I doubt any country would admit it if they didn't have to. But It wouldn't be a question of admitting it.
Okay.
Right now, as we all know, we have Japanese, British, German, and American military ships sailing up and down the China coast, especially through the Taiwan Straits. They take water samples. If they had noticed a spike in radiation, they certainly would be using that right now to say, look, we have evidence because of the spike in radiation. This is, remember, this was a report by an anonymous State Department official.
Yes.
Based on a set of photographs which shows a bunch of cranes around an area near a dock. It could have been of any
satellite
ship.
images.
They haven't produced anything to say that this was in fact a submarine. They're just saying, well, there was something there and we think it sank. And we're jumping to this conclusion that it was a nuclear submarine. Why are they bringing this forward now? If they've had this information all along, don't you think they would have released it as soon as they were certain?
Okay. So that's interesting. The rivalry, especially when it comes to the naval rivalry between US and China aside, because there are also territorial rivalries which are included in this. Professor Madhav Nalapad, it's interesting what Einar has said. However, interestingly, since we have these images which nonetheless have come in, why would, let's presume that there indeed has been a sinking of a Chinese nuke ship, why would China want to keep a lid on it, given the way strategic alliances currently are placed with Taiwan?
Meghna, I'd like to point out that today we are in the era of Cold War 2.0, and that is between China and a lot of other countries, including the major democracies, including the Quad.
Right.
There's no question now that Cold War 2.0 is on. And may I point out that perception is a very important part of battle. Before you go for a kinetic battle, you need to win the battle of perception, shock and awe. First, you create a perception of infallibility. And frankly, I'm told it was a Zhao-class submarine, nuclear submarine, and that it indeed had a mishap. And it has become non-functional. So whether there was any leak of nuclear fuel or not, we cannot say. Certainly, I don't have any input on that particular thing. But I do have input that there was a Zhao-class nuclear submarine that became non-functional, shall we say, because of some unspecified reasons that we don't have access to. The point is, Meghna, very simple. In war, technology is very, very important. High tech is very, very important. Modern weapons are technological. Look at the use of drones, for example. Look at what Israel has done in Lebanon to Hezbollah.
Yes.
That's entirely because of technology. Ultra-modern technology used by the Israelis with a certain amount of help, I'm sure, from one or two other countries. But they have been using it very effectively to cripple Hezbollah. So technology is very important. And for Chinese are concerned, the biggest blow to them in this new Cold War 2.0, has been the denial of technology. Previously, they were getting technology any way they wanted it. In fact, there was a time, in the 1990s, it began under Bill Clinton, especially. The Chinese got everything, the Indians got nothing. We were a democracy, we got nothing. Chinese were an autocracy, they got everything. So technology is very, very important. And the fact is, therefore, that this is showing the impact of the technology restrictions that have been imposed on China. And they're not able to get this technology, and they're not able to develop it on their own. So it's very likely that is the cause of the mishap. These are the hypotheses that I have been, according to data given to me by my group. This is the analysis that we have, that there was indeed a nuclear malfunction of a nuclear sub, and the sub is no longer operational. Whether there was a leak of nuclear fuel or not, we do not know. But it is very clear, Meghna, that technology sanctions are biting hard into China, and that they will try and make every effort, somehow get those technologies, if not one way, then the other way, because the Chinese are a long way from developing a technology on their own. They need to have access to other countries by one means or the other, rather than develop it on their own.
Okay.
So I think this is what we are witnessing now in this particular
Einar Tanjan, is
situation.
that what we are witnessing right now? The tech sanctions hitting China hard and forcing it to revisit the kind of image that it wants to have, that of its infallible military might. After all, when it comes to the Navy, Chinese has the largest Navy in the world. Something like this would damage the reputation, the perception in this Cold War Part 3.
Okay, so let me say one thing. I hate to contradict my good friend and very knowledgeable friend, Dr. Malapat. But my family actually built submarines during World War II. We did them. This was in the Great Lakes region. I can tell you that submarines don't sink because of technology. They sink because water comes in, and it can come in two ways. The hull cracks, or there's a malfunction in something that lets water into the area. That's highly unlikely. And this isn't the kind of thing that's going to be controlled by high technology. If there was some sinking, and I, as Dr. Nalpat has pointed out, really don't know much, and all the information is coming from the United States, which is less than trustworthy at this point, especially when it comes to China. It's just a situation. In terms of China needing technology, I mean, ASPI, which is a Australian think tank, which is not at all friendly to China, says that China is, I think, ahead in 46 out of 54 technological areas. So this idea that somehow China needs the rest of the world, and it's developed a 5G, 6G, EVs, solar, wind power, things, you go down the list. This is not the China that was 20 years ago. China is now a leader. It has the intellectual capability and power, and so does India. And so, this is the issue about a rising Asia. You have the mines, you have the training. The world is yours if you go out and seize it. If you're depending on U.S. and Europe to give you share technology, it will never be there. And I think China has shown that it doesn't need these other technologies. It is simply a bump in the road as China goes forward. And if it was being done to India, I think the same would be true.
Einar Tanjan, one thing that you've said, you started your answer by saying, we really don't know much. Perhaps that's going to be one of the differences between India and China, because it's an incident linked to China. No one really knows much, because when it comes to transparency, that's not something that we have had in the past from China, which is why it's now fueled these fears that there could be a major ecological disaster that is currently looming, but we've not been informed about it. Since you said that you know about, and your family's been in the business of building submarines, you've been associated with submarines. If there is, let's say, a nuclear submarine which sinks, how and would it impact the ecology, the marine ecology?
Well, I mean, you would notice an immediate spike in radiation. And as I said, that could be detected by the numerous warships who are taking water samples going up and down the straits. It would be immediately noticeable. If they had coupled these pictures and any kind of credible source and a State Department or defense official had come forward and made an announcement and then said, listen, here are the test samples taken by the Japanese, the British, the German, and American fleets, and here we show a spike in radiation.
Okay.
Then it would be very credible. But absent that, you have to consider that you cannot impute. I cannot say that all Indians dislike their mother-in-laws, and therefore I'm going to accuse them of killing them or potentially plotting to kill them. This is such a thing as evidence. There's presumption of innocence until proven guilty. If I make unnamed allegations against you, how do you disprove it if you haven't done anything? And this
well,
is
there
the
are satellite images which are being shown. There are satellite images which the US official has shown, but Professor Madhav Nalapat, does that convince you? Because all of these allegations are also coming in about internal accountability of the Chinese People's Liberation Army, something which they have been speaking about internally, also rising corruption within the defense industry.
Well, Meghna, again, I would, dislike, taking issue with my old friend Einar Tanjan, We are very old friends and very good friends, and we remain so to this day. But let me say that if you go to Mumbai and you go to Trombay to the Bhabha Atomic Research Center, and you see there's an old reactor there, and they will take you to a huge water tank. It's like a well, and you look down and you see a blue light that looks so innocent, and it's called Cherenkov radiation. That blue light can destroy a small town. It's radioactive, but you don't get the radioactivity up. The fact is that water can basically muffle radioactivity unless you send submersibles down below and examine and take away samples from down below. We don't know how, because these days subs can go very, very deep, far deeper than they could go in the 1940s or even the 1980s. So if it had gone sufficiently deep, and it's a very deep ocean, and possibly it's a very deep shipyard. Maybe
that's a very important point, and I hope that Einar Tangent has been suitably answered with this reply of Professor Madhav Nalapat. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. I'd love to continue this conversation, but we are going to definitely have these conversations here on Times Now. Really appreciate it, Professor Madhav Nalapat, as well as Einar Tangent, for joining us here on the show. With that, we are slipping into a short break. Don't go anywhere.